karanasan mo po, tingnan ba nakasalanan ng video?
Media educators are warning call to defend press freedom.
This corruption in media won't be reduced to a
Sinimulan po ng aking ina ang Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. Nararapat lamang na matapos ang programang ito sa panahon ng aking panunungkulan. Isinasaayos na po ang sistema upang mapabilis ang pagpapatupad ng reformang agraryo. Ginagawa ng pamahalaan ng lahat ng hakbang upang maipamahagi sa ating magsasaka ang mga lupaing diniligan at pinagyaman ng kanilang pawis. Subalit, mayroon pa rin pong ayaw paawat sa pagtatanim ng mga balakid. Ang tugon ko sa kanila, susunod tayo sa batas, ang atas ng batas, ang atas ng taong bayan at ang atas ko. Bago ako bumaba sa pwesto, naipamigay na dapat ang lahat ng lupaing sakop ng CARP.
You're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. We're now joined by a man who's a staunch agrarian reform advocate serving as counsel and lecturer of the Katipunan ng Magsasaka ng Batangas. He's worked as land reform specialist of the National Program Support for Agrarian Reform under the World Bank and is currently the secretary of the department. He is Secretary Virgilio de los Reyes. Secretary, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Where are we in terms of agrarian reform?
Where are we is we're in the last 20% of what we need to distribute.
Which is how big?
Around anywhere from 700 to 800,000 hectares left.
700, how many hectares have been distributed?
We've
in the
had
past?
around 4.3 to 4.6 million hectares that we have distributed. But the sad part about this is that the last 20% are the hardest ones to distribute.
Hardest why?
Well, because they're private land, they're titled land. And this is normally by way of compulsory acquisition, which means whether the owner likes it or not, we're going to distribute it, because that's what the law says.
Sounds tough.
Yes. In the past, what we have distributed is mostly government-owned land by way, and private land by way of voluntary land transfer.
Which means that was easy.
That was easy. There were no titles. The first time you're putting a title, no problem with technical descriptions. Voluntary land transfer, no payment made by the government. There's already an agreement between the landowner and the farmer beneficiary. So what DAR does is really just bless the union and then that's it, or bless the distribution and that's it.
700, 800,000 hectares, how are you going to do it?
Okay. The first problem we had when we came in was that the way we counted the balance of land in the Philippines under CARP, we did not take out what was supposed to be removed, which means retention areas of landowners were part of the balance that we talked about.
Okay.
And in 2010, the records that we had were shot. I mean, we were not sure what crop we had distributed, what was the balance, what were the sizes. It was only really after 2009, 2010, when DAR began to really look at what was the balance, what was the nature of the balance, and more importantly, what were the obstacles that were leading to the situation where it was very hard to distribute.
What are the obstacles?
Well, a big part of the technical descriptions, records, land records, anyone who has ever dealt with land in the Philippines knows that the Register of Deeds and the DNR has problems. And we are now working to correct these problems. The LRA has gone digitized.
Yes.
DNR is in the process of digitizing its maps. That should help a lot. But in 2010, 2011, the LRA was just finishing up. So the processes inside the department had to catch up with that kind of adjustment. So that's one big thing, land records.
All right.
The second one is CARP began in 1988. And you have many situations where the farmer beneficiaries who were there in 1988, after 20 plus years, are either dead, have been changed, or have moved away. The problem is, who do you give it to? In some situations, like in Negros, you have situations where the landowner leased the land. So there is now a lessee who has hired a set of workers. The landowner, when he was still running the land, had his own set of workers.
Okay.
Now, under the law, regular workers of a farm. It does not talk about employer, it talks about farm. So you have two groups right there already who are possible beneficiaries that you have to contend with who will be the beneficiary. So you have to do a lot of mediation processes to be able to make sure that you're able to give it to the right farmer beneficiary.
And of the 4 million or so hectares, how much of this land has this problem?
Well, let's just look at the one that's the balance. In the balance, compulsory acquisition is more than 60% of the balance. In the past, overall, from 1972 onwards, compulsory acquisition is only 7%, or roughly around 20% if you include the rice and corn lands of Marcos, President Marcos, which is also really a form of compulsory acquisition. So of the total universe of what we gave away, we only gave away 20% by way of compulsory acquisition. And left behind 60% plus of the remaining balance that have title, have landowners who don't want to give the land, farmer beneficiaries that you have a problem identifying. That is what's left for the Aquino administration.
So you said whether they like it or not, of the remaining 800,000 hectares, what if they don't?
If they don't, then we can cancel their title. Of course, we give them notice. And
Okay.
I think this is the problem that has arisen.
Okay.
Because of the deadline of 2014.
Okay. June 2014.
June 30, 2014. That's like December 21, 2012.
Okay.
It came to pass.
Okay.
The people think that by June 30, 2014, you cannot acquire anymore.
Okay.
But the law itself allows an escape clause and says if there is a pending case by June 30, 2014, then you can go ahead and proceed to cover it beyond 2014. And that is the main reason why we began to issue notices of coverage, which are
Okay.
like summons,
Okay.
to all the landowners. Now, when they get the notice of coverage, that's the time they can object and say, hey, look, my land is not going to be covered because this is my retention area, or my land cannot be covered because it's supposed to be reclassified, exempted. So there are remedies available to landowners, but we
Okay.
need to start the process immediately.
What kind of land remains? Is this productive land?
Productive land, before, DAR did not have data on what was the balance. We did not know how much
What was
sugar,
going
how
on?
much coconut. Now we know that the biggest balance is coconut.
Okay.
But they
Privately
are very,
owned, coconut
privately
land.
owned, but these
Okay.
are very small land holdings.
Okay.
Sugar has a very small balance, but the large land holdings are mostly in sugar.
All right.
Rice, there's still some left, but these are mostly the land holdings which should have been covered under the President Marcos decree, but for some reason or the other, mostly for technical description issues, these were not covered. So the biggest balance is still coconut. The largest land holdings are in sugar.
You're saying coconut, but small land holdings.
Yes.
So
10
this
to
is a
24.
lot
10
of
to 24,
landowners.
Yes, a lot of land
How do you
holdings.
handle that?
Well, with the coordination with the LRA and the DNR, we've been able to get the data faster than what we've ever had before.
Okay.
Since LRA digitized, you can now get current titles at the flick of a finger. The
Yeah.
problem is the predecessor titles are still on paper, which means that if a landowner transferred this land sometime after 1988, in 2012, if there were 4 transfers, to trace back those transfers, we have to do mano-mano.
And how many are you talking about? Do you have any idea?
We have an idea of how many land holdings these are. We don't know how many landowners there are because there are many titles which have common landowners.
And when you put out a notice coverage, who do you give it to?
We first serve it to you personally. If you refuse to receive it or the address is wrong, then we have no choice but to publish it in the newspaper. That's why we've been publishing notice of coverage in the newspaper. I think today we had 2.5 pages of notice of coverage. From that day on, 30 days after, you need to go to the Department of Agrarian Reform and tell us the remedies if you're a landowner and say, hey, my land should not be covered.
What were the failures of the program before 2010?
Well, a big part was the delaying the private agricultural land. And because you delayed the private agricultural land, the landowner who knows that there's a Damocles sword hanging over his head is not going to invest. But the farmer who's working on that land, in the meantime, has been deprived of the land for more than 20 years. So what did you have? You had the situation where the agricultural sector of private land, you could not make any investment because at some point your land is going to be taken over. The problem with the CARP is that it took us this long a time to be able to implement it. And that has an impact on agricultural productivity because of the uncertainty. If we had done this earlier, in the first 10, 20 years, and given the land to the farmer beneficiaries earlier, I think agriculture would be a lot more robust than what we have now.
The 4 million hectares that have been given away, are these productive areas now?
Some are, some are not. The problem here also is the issue of support services.
Yeah.
You know, we have 2 agencies that give support services, DA and DAR. And prior to 2010, there's always been a convergence between DA and DAR. That's always been on paper. There's some policy paper that says we ought to converge. But the reality is, it wasn't happening. What the President has told us, especially DA and DAR, is you guys sit in one room, talk about it and find out how you're going to intervene. And this is exactly what we're doing right now. In the rice sector, DA is doing a lot of the high cost rural infrastructure, irrigation, farm-to-market road. We're into strengthening the organization of the agrarian reform beneficiary. In the field, there is no distinction between an agrarian reform beneficiary and an ordinary farmer. As far as they're concerned, they're all farmers. But as far as government programs are concerned, there was a dichotomy. And that, to me, was the biggest issue that we had. That's what we're trying to work on right now, getting the bureaucracies to work together to be more efficient, effective.
You're talking about the transition plan.
Yes.
What is the transition plan? Are people going to lose their jobs?
No. On November 22, 2012, the President issued an administrative order. And he essentially said, okay, how are we going to be more efficient and effective in coming out with support services, land distribution, and land registration? Those are the three things in the Administrative Order 34. The transition plan that you heard about a few months ago was a voluntary transition plan. We were offering a voluntary transition plan to those people in the so-called non-critical post. But it was voluntary. And so that whatever is vacated, we could hire them in areas where we needed them.
Okay.
Because we have a problem with our organization. We have 525 people in Region 1, 2,000 hectares balance. We have 187 people in Negros Occidental, 130,000 hectares balance. How did that happen? Well, because in 1988, we assumed that every province had the same number of land. In 2012, when we are using computers rather than typewriters, we realized that it's easy to collate data. But that has not changed. So the transition plan, no one was supposed to lose a job if he did not want to lose a job. Now, in 2014, I think this is a good time for us to really sit down. DA was devolved in 1991. LRA approved surveys, DNR approved surveys. DAR and DA both give support services. So the mandate from the President is, okay, come up with a plan. We present this to him in May, and hopefully this will form part of the legislative agenda in July.
Okay, we'll talk more about support services and the crisis that some people are talking about after the break. News Cafe will take a short break. Secretary De Los Reyes and I will still have more to discuss. Please stay tuned.
Ang opisina ko ay nasa 80 plus provinces. At 4 days in a week ako ay nasa field. At kinakausap ko ang iba't ibang empleyado ng DAR. At kung gusto niyo sumabay sa akin next week, iniimbitahan ko kayo lahat sumabay para mapatunayan mo na natatakot ako. Humaharap ako sa lahat ng magsasaka sa buong bansa. Kinakausap ko lahat ng empleyado one-on-one, General Assembly sa bawat lugar. Ano sasabihin nila natatakot akong humarap sa mga magsasaka? Handa ako makipag-dialogue at makipag-usap sa taong mahinahon. Kung gusto niyo ako sabayan, okay lang po.
You're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel, and we're still joined by Department of Agrarian Reform Secretary Virgilio De Los Reyes. Secretary, thanks again for joining us. You were very worked up in that video.
Well, because they were accusing me that I was not going to my office, as if my office are only on the 4th floor. And second, I was afraid to face the farmers, which is definitely not true. I said, I'm prepared to face anyone na mahinahon. Pero yung mga gustong hindi mahinahon, paano kayo mag-uusap?
Where is consultation and process in all of this?
Well, all the offices that we have a provincial agrarian reform committee in every province. That's the formal structure. But the informal structure really occurs on the municipal and on the provincial level. Even the case of Task Force Apalad spread over June to December 2012, there were many, many consultations that occurred that discussed the per land holding issues, what were the problems, what were the solutions that can be made. But the consultation is part and parcel of our job.
And how has it been so far?
Well, you have to be very patient because you also have to understand the impatience of the farmers. And
Impatience for what?
impatience for how long it has taken us. It has taken us 20 plus years to do a comprehensive agrarian reform program. And we are constantly compared to other countries who have done this at a much, much shorter time.
What
So I
are
understand the impatience.
What are they specifically waiting for?
To get the land that they were supposed to get in 1988 to 1998.
And to get the support.
And to get the support
services.
services.
Are there funds for social credit?
Yes. Contrary to the allegations, last year the President allocated 1 billion because there were many departments, including the DAD, that did not finish up their money. So the DBM allocated 1 billion for credit. But in the original program that we had for the 2013 budget, we had already put in 1 billion. Dumating nga lang na mas maaga yung inallocate ni Presidente. So right now, in 2013, we have a 2 billion fund, which is in the land bank, for us to be able to extend credit to the Cagayan reform beneficiaries, plus another billion in crop insurance.
Okay.
So, you see, the government before used to do direct lending, which means DAR itself went to the field, looked for the Agrarian reform beneficiary, and lent the money.
Okay.
The policy now, it goes through the land bank. The problem with this new program is that you have a learning curve. You have a learning curve for the bureaucracy. You also have a learning curve for the Cagayan reform beneficiaries to be able to access the credit. And that's where we are now.
Why is the land bank system better than the DAR going to the farmers
They're bankers.
themselves?
They're not
They can
subject
handle
to
the money better.
They're not subject to political capture that you lend money, otherwise I'll have a rally or some person with influence calling up the DAR, say, you lend money to these Cagayan reform beneficiaries because they happen to be my friends or my constituents. When it's the bank, then there's a real appraisal that goes on. But what we've done with the land bank, the DA, and the DAR is to lessen the requirements and make sure that it's easier to get. But the most important thing that I think the land bank, the DA, and the DAR are doing right now is that we embed managers, or we put in people to assist the farmers on how to use the money. And soon we're going to have an agreement between DA, DAR, and land bank so that we can make sure that there is really supervised credit done by professionals.
That wasn't there before.
That wasn't there before.
There was just money.
There was just money, and you could get it from the DAR. You know, during that time, President Marcos, you also had Masagana 99.
Right.
Of course, the Masagana 99 that people remember is the second Masagana 99. The first Masagana 99, which was supervised credit, actually worked. It was only the second Masagana 99 that became a problem because that one was issued to Samahang Nayon groups without real honest-to-goodness credit appraisal and support of the government in how to be able to disburse the money. So we're looking at the first Masagan 99 and said, okay, what made that work? Why was the repayment rate very high? Why is the microfinance repayment rate very high? And that's why the DA, the DAR, and the Land Bank are working very closely for the supervised credit.
The expertise that the farmers need, how is that cascaded to them?
Okay. There's also another change there. This is the first time this is happening. DAR is our Department of Agrarian Reform is paying the state universities and colleges to do the crop extension work, the technical extension work. You see, the big change that occurred in 1991 was when the Department of Agriculture was devolved, which means the municipal agriculture officer and the provincial agriculture officer was brought down to the LGU. Now, the results are spotty. There are some LGUs who are very, very good, very, very supportive. The local executive puts in a lot of money, and you have real agriculturists going on in there. But in some places, that is not the case. So when we took out the national agency involvement in agricultural extension in 1991, it was, 3 years after CARP, that wasn't in the original equation. DAR was the one supposed to do that. But even the structure of DAR for agricultural extension was not there. What we had were specialists in strengthening the organization, but not in actual technical extension. So from 1991 all the way to what we have now, technical extension for technology on crop production was nowhere. So now we're using the state universities and colleges who have good people, good professors, very few students, but still, that's still a very good resource. And they're all over the country. And practically every state university has an agricultural school.
How are we in terms of skill compared to our ASEAN neighbors?
I'm no expert in agriculture, and as they would say, I'm incompetent to answer that.
The bishops are saying there's a crisis.
There's a crisis because of two things. One is the date, June 30, 2014.
Okay, why is that a crisis?
Well, because the law, RA 9700, said it will expire in June 30, 2014. The problem with Section 30 is it's toward the end of the law. Okay. The escape clause that says that you can cover beyond June 30, 2014. In fact, the data that said we will not finish by 2014 was something I was announcing in May 2012. It came from us. We shot ourselves in the foot and said, look, we're not going to finish by 2014, but this is what we're going to do.
Okay.
Remedial measures. So claim folder review, we exhumed all the records, checked what happened there, issued a notice of coverage. Pagdating ng December 2012, people were saying, people were acting as if it was they who discovered that it was not going to finish.
Okay.
So it's the date. Number 2 is the balance. The perception of what the balance is. If you are running a campaign, it's very nice to say you have 900,000, 600,000 balance. But when you begin to analyze what the balance is, then you realize the retention is still there. The problematic has not yet been disaggregated on what is the real issue with the problematic land. In fact, we found land which are even doubly counted twice in our own database. So we've had to clean our own database. So it's coming from two things: the date and the perception of what the balance is. The date, because people think you can't go beyond 2016. That's why in July 2012, the president said, we'll do it by 2016.
Right.
Is it doable to finish it in 2016? I think it can be done. I think it can be done if DAR, DNR, LRA, and Land Bank, we work together some more, which is what we're doing right now. I think it can be done.
You think, in terms of that, working together, you think right now you are where you want to be?
We could be someplace else. Better. But, the problem here is that we really began to have hard data in late 2012.
Okay.
In May or February 2012,
That's really late.
The data was anecdotal. We knew people were telling us, employees were telling us this, but we didn't have the data because when we began to look at the data we had, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. We had aggregate data on number of land holdings. We knew the title. We knew the owner. Sometimes you look at the claim folder and there was nothing there. So we really had to go back and check it out. There was no inventory when we came in because that really stopped 2008, 2009 while they were waiting for the extension of the so-called extension of the CARP. But that's another issue whether there was needed to be an extension. But anyway, for 2 years, talagang nabahura yung DAR.
So you're like looking at December of 2012 going forwards and December 2012 going backwards.
Yes.
Parang ganun ba?
Yes. And if you want another horror story,
Go ahead, please. We love horror
1.2 million,
stories.
yeah. After all, anyway, 1.2 million hectares was given under collective title, which means you have a parcel of land, 100 hectares, you have 50 farmers. The farmers don't have they don't have the boundaries of what they own. That's 1.2 million hectares. What we need to break up is around 700 to 800,000.
How did that happen?
Well, we were
50
in a
farmers,
rush.
hati-hati sa 1
No, we
million
were in a
hectares.
rush. We rushed to distribute so we could have
A piece of paper.
Yes. What happens now? This morning I had a long discussion with we're drafting the new rules on collective CLOA subdivision. A lot of the people who were there in 92, 93, 94 are dead. We don't know how to proceed because the heirs, what do we do with the heirs? What do we do with the boundaries? That's around 700,000 hectares that it's waiting to be subdivided. And that's a lot of them are private agricultural land. You add on the government-owned land, that's even bigger. So that's one second generation issue that they're also trying to fix up now. The order of the president is to minimize whatever distortion in the property rights by 2016, distribute the land, come up with the new system for support services before it steps down so that they can go ahead and focus on agriculture.
You know how land is. The first generation wants to own the land. The second generation doesn't know what to do with it. Worse, minsan nag-aaway-aaway pa pamilya over the land. So you step in? How does that work?
Well, on the landowner side, to a certain extent, that's an advantage because that means that the people who were so emotional about the land 20 years ago, it's their children now who own the land. They're not very emotional about it. There is no emotional attachment.
Mas madali
on
na
the
kausap.
landowner side, mas madaling kausap. And I think that's happening. On the farmer beneficiary side, the problem is the CARP law did not provide for succession in agricultural land. We are using the civil code, which is essentially divide among the heirs equally.
Right.
But when you have a 2-hectare parcel of land, you divide among 4 people, you end up with 0.5. We still don't have a law on succession to agrarian reform land. And that's one of the things we're studying right now. What kind of legislative intervention do we need to make sure that...
Do we need more laws?
I think that this is one law that we need because right now it's open.
Okay.
Because If you're a farmer, you have 4 children, assuming your wife is also, both parents are dead, you divide the 2 hectares by 0.5. What are you going to do with it? What is going to be the control mechanisms that you have for this? We forgot that people died.
We have a couple of minutes left. I'll leave the time for you to talk to your critics.
Well, you know, the way when I took this job, I knew that this was, I would have this amount of critics and brickbats that I would get. And my principle has always been, let's discuss this in a sober manner and look at the data. And that's the same message that I've told the bishops. I said, look, I'm prepared to sit down with you and look at the data that we have. And then from there, perhaps we can find out how we can work together.
Have they talked to you?
I've talked to some of them. I'm finalizing a note which I will most probably send to the major religious superiors, to the other stakeholders, even to the employees and to the bishops on what is really happening. Because, you know, I've tried to keep quiet about what happened in the past. Because my feeling was I needed to work on the future.
Right.
But for that silence, all the sins of the past are now being dumped on this current administration. And I think that's unfair.
And how has the reaction been? You said you've talked to a few of them.
I've talked to a few of them. I have not issued it yet. I'm still
Okay.
finalizing it to the, you know, these copywriters take forever to do the copy. So not to gloss over things, but to
Right.
make sure it's understandable more than anything else. But I think we have a few more dialogues that are going on, and I've always been open to this.
Are you positive that we'll do it by 2016?
I have no choice about being positive or negative. I have to be positive.
It's your job.
Yep, it's my job.
Thanks very much,
Thank you.
Secretary, for coming to the studio and sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. We'd like to thank our guest, Secretary de los Reyes, for granting us this one-on-one interview. Thank you, Secretary. Join us again Friday for another round of 360-degree discussions right here on News Cafe. Salamat po.